there it is. She is at home finally after the typical
On this episode of Snale Racing, there's a whole lot of bouncing going on with Danny Bonaduce, the 1985 4Runner. Knob gets the transmission stack and the engine installed. Of course, nothing ever goes right the first time. So if you've ever wondered how to install an engine, you'll have multiple opportunities to learn today because Knob always gets the job done, no matter how many times it takes. Like he always says, if it's worth doing once, it's worth doing 5 times. But let's start at the beginning of this typical day in the Snale Racing garage.
All right, good morning, kids. So today we are going to try to mock the tranny and transfer cases into Danny Bonaduce. We have the Sky transfer case mount. So we are basically going to start by bolting that up to the transfer cases set and getting her all jacked in. So stay tuned. Okay, so basically what we're going to do is we're just going to start by bolting the plate to the transfer case mounts here. It's pretty straightforward. There's 4 bolts in each. The cross member comes with new bolts, so that's a sweet deal. So what I'm going to do is just put a little Loctite in here and get these started. Awesome, all the way to the wall. Okay, so pretty straightforward here. The reason that I decided to go with the Skies versus like the Budbuilt or any other brands that I have is the way that these cases hook on here. This is double plated, so you can recess a hex head. The Budbuilt crossmember that I have on my rigs uses a recessed Allen head, and honestly, dude, recessed hardware sucks. You saw this all got Loctited in. All the hardware on that one gets copious amounts of anti-seize, so I can get the hardware back out with a 5mm, right? So you ruin one of those or you break your tool or whatever, then you're drilling them out and it's just a complete pain in the ass. So that was a big sell. The other cool thing about this crossmember is it has separate plates to where it mounts to the vehicle or it mounts underneath the truck. So what actually can go on with this is the 4 bolts obviously mount to the bottom of the pad of the truck. So you can mount this crossmember either to the bottom, you just want like a standard height, or if you want to bring a drivetrain height, you mount to the top, and you can actually block this up a little bit to get it up inside the vehicle as high as you want. And this is just a one piece. The Budbuilt is a cross member, and then it has another skid guard on it, so it's like a 2-piece, just extra parts, more hardware. Part of the reason this guy's just right up the road from me is literally like a couple hours, and made in USA. Nothing against Budbuilt. I love his product. It's awesome, but just with shipping and everything, dude's on the East Coast, and it just makes it suck. Now that that's on there, I'm going to get the jack over here, and we'll see if we can get this put up in the truck, get the tunnel all cut out. Let's go from there. Alright, so we got the tranny mocked up. What we're going to do is get the trans tunnel mocked up. As you may remember, this truck was an automatic, so it doesn't have the appropriate tunnel. And this is what she looks like here. You can see this is where the front stick is, so I'm going to have to open this up around here a little bit. And then the first rear transfer case is right underneath here, so I'm going to open up this a little bit. I'm going to go on here something like that, somewhere like that. My plan is for that rear box is to use like our Rad Designs triple stick and move everything up to, we'll have all the transfer sticks will be right here with the main stick. That way we don't have to cut the body back here. That ends up getting in the way of, like, if you have a center console or something like that. Kind of want to keep this thing looking as stock as possible. At first glance, I want you to look at it and see that it's stock. It's super clean. It hasn't been butchered in any way. This gate fits right. So these two sticks will fit no problem. Just one more thing done. Yeah, so tranny's in, holes cut. Now we can work on the hydraulics. We did get the clutch hard parts, hydraulics and the hard parts, because obviously the truck wasn't a manual before. What you do want to do is go ahead and buy the ASIN parts for the hydraulics if you can. The aftermarket parts are really a joke. And as far as the clutch, I went with the LUK just simply because honestly the OE clutch is almost twice as much money, and I just kind of don't really think it's worth it. With the crawler gears and not huge tires on this guy, we're not going to necessarily need that extra clutch. And frankly, if you know how to drive clutch, it shouldn't matter. Okay, LUK is good stuff. Flywheel, make sure these are a step flywheel, make sure your guy knows it. I was lucky enough to find a Craigslist deal on a bunch of gray interior parts and some other miscellaneous knickknacks that I didn't know I needed. One of those was the larger 17-gallon fuel tank. So the tank that was in the 85 was the smaller, or just under a 15-gallon tank. And once I got in there, it was completely like varnished up and all lacquered. See, that pump obviously is rusty, so I mean, it sat here for 5 years. Part of that's mine, but part of it was from wherever it came from before. So I ended up scoring that tank for a good deal. It came with the pump and the sender and all this stuff, but it also came with a broken high pressure fitting and wires that were damaged. So like everything else, buying cheap parts ends up maybe not so much that it's not still cheap, but it becomes a pain in the ass sometimes when you're chasing those little extras. So a friend of mine was good enough to throw down this other sender. Excuse me, this is a pump cradle, it's not a sender, that has all the lines on it. I did have to do some wiring repair to it. So just with this tank project, there's 4 sets of wires that were damaged because the wires on the truck were spliced, which means they were broken and spliced back in there. The new one that I got was broken, that one that I got was broken, and the one in the 85 was broken. Yeah, I don't know why the hell it's so hard to get those unplugged or something. But yeah, try to take care when you're dealing with wires, because it's, yeah, stretching and breaking wires and then like doing shoddy repairs, it just makes pain in the ass for everybody later on. This 85 was literally, the fuel pump wires were twisted and just bare hanging out underneath the truck. So yeah, like I always say, if you don't know about wiring, just stay away from it. Look at my mess. I scored a bunch of gray parts. This is my bezel, but glove box, the whole gray dash, the tack dash, the SR5 cluster. And while it's not necessarily minty, this truck isn't really minty either, so dash all gutted, get that all cleaned up. I got the tunnel all cut. Tranny and transfer cases are in, or they're mocked in, so that kind of leads us up to what I'm up to today. I scored all the clutch goodies, but because this was an auto swap, I didn't end up with the flywheel bolts or any of that stuff, so just because of my own undoing, I have to wait for flywheel bolts. In the meantime, I'm going to mock the motor in, so at least we can get the tranny front to back, because it's got some slop in there. So I want to get the motor in, get the tranny front to back good, and then I can measure the driveline stuff. I consider using the truck winch somehow or whatever, but that's how I came up old school with the come along and the roof beam. So here we go. So in full disclosure, I had to re-rig this, and like when I said old school, I should have went totally old school. Yeah. Chain is sort of infinitely adjustable. Forgot about that, so take two. We got her all in there, and that wasn't that dumb, except for having to do it 2 times. So she went in. It's almost like she goes there. Since I don't have the parts, we were just kind of mocking this up. I wanted to make sure that the transmission was front to back properly, and get my drive shaft lengths. That way I'm not, that way they're right. We have the weight, the drivetrain weight in here, so basically missing the cap weight a little bit still. I mean, I can mock that up, but I have a pretty good idea of what my numbers are now anyway. Basically, all I'm gonna have to do here is choose which parts I ultimately end up using. This is the stock rear that came out, stock front that came out. This is a 3rd gen 4Runner rear, and that other one is a spare to my 4Runner. Unfortunately, none of these are the right length. They're both going to have to get retubed. So the whole point of this was to measure for drive shaft. So I did an initial measurement of the driveline lengths, and then I figured since we have an offset front diff, we will jack this bad boy up and see what kind of length we can get out of. So a little jack stand action there, and then we're just jacked up and blocked here. And you can see that front end is picked up off the ground. So these are new springs, and the truck kind of, I mean, most of the weight's back on there, I guess. So new springs, and then I just will get these measurements here real quick. That is 34. Like I said, kind of because of the weight, we are teeter-tottering here a little bit. See that front tire's up off the ground. So a little bit of garage flex never hurts, right? And I'm about as far as I'm gonna get before I start trying to drop this thing on myself. So here's what she looks like. Definitely give me some rubbage right here, a little massaging, and then I don't really like the wheel center on that. As I was saying, like the wheel center on this isn't spectacular in my mind. You can see how it was getting into the fender. It would be nice if they would have gave us like another inch forward, because it looks like that's actually kind of behind spring center. I mean, it is pushed back a tiny bit, but it's more like to the rear of that fender hole versus being up front. But, and again, you see where our approach angle is here versus getting the tire pushed way out there. So, yeah, for what this is, I think it'll be all right. But just be advised, there's a picture of these of the lift kit. That. Some here. Really stock Toyota type rears are never like flex monsters anyway. Plus, yes, there's no cap, there's no weight in the truck. So here's what it looks like from this side. And not really anywhere near the bump stop yet. And we weren't anywhere near the front bump stop yet either. That pretty good. So we get a little bit more up. We've got good pitman arm or clearance right here on the drag link, which is what we were after. Obviously, as these get worked in, it will flex a little bit more, and having the vehicle loaded in a trailer, it makes the truck flex more. So while you can do this in your garage and get an idea of lengths and measurements, having the truck twisted up on the trail and things like that is always going to get you a little bit more clearance, a little bit more stuff. So just kind of be mindful of that. The driveline thing, that one needs to be completely retubed, and I can't do it without cutting apart a bunch of drivelines. I don't really feel like doing that. Just money better spent with a lathe than a balancer. And then, yeah, I guess that is that for that part of it. So what I'm going to do now is get it back off the jacks, get the motor back out of it, and then I will get my hardware and the clutch and all that stuff on tomorrow. And then I will be able to, once I get all the hardware in the clutch, I can put the long block back in for good and get it off the stand, get it out from underfoot again. And then yeah, what's next? Getting closer. So yeah, we are getting clear. So since this was the auto swap flywheel bolts, there's your flywheel bolt number, the 22Rs and 11mm, it's cleared. Pressure plate bolts. Those are probably in your bolts pile, but I figured what the heck. Flywheel, clutch. And while we're here, I ended up running into this throwout bearing issue where this is clamped onto this lower piece. So the hub ends up not being exchangeable with the new throwout bearing. So the motor won't be going in today again. But pile the bearings in. I said with that, generally what I do is I just get a driver that will fit into the end of the crank and then drive it in like you saw. So let's go ahead and get the flywheel on and the clutch all bolted on, and then that's all we'll be able to do until we get that throwout bearing piece. Alrighty, so we are back with this clutch fiasco as always. Okay, so what I ended up running into was the throwout bearing, because if you remember, this was an automatic. I never had any of that stuff. There are two or more 22R throwout bearings. So the one I started with, which came with the clutch kit, which is right for the clutch kit, is this guy here. Alright, this piece requires a separate hub. It's called a collar, a separate collar that this presses onto, and then that gets moved by your throwout arm or whatever. So this is a later model 22R throwout bearing, and this combines everything. It's the hub and the spring and the bearing all as one unit, instead of having four pieces for this, because you have the bearing, you have the collar, and then you have two separate clips that clip these on. So Yeah, this makes it real nice. This snap ring can't really fall off of here, and it will just easily slide onto your bearing. I've had this before a long time ago. I went to stab the tranny in one of my other trucks, got it all the way in there, all the way bolted up, went to roll off the creeper and noticed that I had kicked one of these snap rings off the throwout bearing. So that went back in there. So what we'll talk about here is just real quick, the arm. We're going to put the little spring in the back. We're going to get a little anti-seize in this hole, a little bit of anti-seize on the ends here, and then we're going to press this together, or snap it together. It doesn't press together. Throwout bearing boot, or the throwout fork boot will go in there, and then we're going to get the motor in the truck today, hopefully for the last time. Alrighty, that was easy. Now, alright, if right now you're saying, wait a minute, that's not where we're supposed to be, that's supposed to be bolted up, I'd be saying, yeah, that's right, it should be bolted up. But like you know, everything I always say is anything worth doing once is worth doing 5 times, at least 5 times. Just ask Bramo. Alright, so here's where I'm at here. I put this flywheel in, and again, this wasn't a manual. Before, I didn't have any of the manual parts. I put it in, tried to grab the crank to turn it over to get the splines and the transmission to line up with the clutch, and it wouldn't turn. So immediately I'm thinking something really bad, because this has been sitting around for a minute. But it's been bagged the whole time, right? Anyway, I pull it out, get to inspecting. The bolt that holds on the plate is too long. There's too much sticking up, like this double washer thing, and it was pinching into the back of the flywheel. So instead of those bolts, I'm going to use these incorporated flanges, and I think that should fix the problem. So let's try this again. What ended up going on right here was the flange head bolts did not work either. They were a little too tall and still hit the back of the flywheel. So ultimately I ended up just taking a standard piece of hardware and removing the lock washer from them, and that got the head low enough to clear the flywheel. So you'll be able to see that right here. All right, there's what we look like now. See that? Yeah, now there's plenty of room. Now it actually moves. Now I can put it in for reals this time. There it is. She is at home finally after the typical anything worth doing once is worth doing 5 times. So 3rd time's the charm. I got her in. It ended up being a little bit of a struggle because the motor was cocked a little bit off. Get these long bolts on there. And that helped guide it in, so not a huge deal. Definitely a little easier without the accessories and stuff on there. But yeah, primarily just one more thing off the floor and out of my way. All right, we're good to go. So motor stabbed. Now what are we waiting on? I'm gonna try to get the fuel system going here shortly. I need a couple seals for that fuel tank. I guess some of these hoses and stuff aren't available from Toyota anymore, so I'm going to double check that and then hit my guys over at Motion and Flow and get some new hoses and things built up. Getting the actual hydraulic brakes, need to get rotors still. I got my hoses picked out, and I will let you know what we do there. I mean, obviously you know what I'm doing for the rotors. We're doing 3rd gen brakes and rotors, 3rd gen 4Runner. The later model with the 12-inch rotors, calipers. And then I found some off-the-shelf rubber hoses that are they're a different Toyota, but they end up being right for this. They end up being a couple inches longer in the front, a couple inches longer in the back, and they end up being, I don't know what my price is yet, but the online price was more like 15 or 20 bucks a piece versus 100 bucks for a set, which really isn't that bad. But at the same time, with that the stainless steel brake thing is cool, except for when you have a problem and no one's got one on the shelf. At least this way we can get a part that will be probably on the shelf, and if not on the shelf, it'll be like an overnight thing. The last time I had the brake, I had some brake hoses built by Motion and Flow. I mean, if they had the stuff in the stock, it would have been like right then, like 20 minutes worth of time. Fact of the matter is, if they have the stuff on the shelf, they can build it like while you're standing there. So if you needed to get some of this stuff done, you can head down there and make sure, or order the parts. That 10mm inverted flare that Toyota uses, I guess, is, you know, it's Toyota stuff. It's probably not your typical Motion and Flow thing or whatever. But like I said, I think the parts when I order them were like 1 or 2 days away. So I had brake lines in like 2 or 3 days, which is still quicker than Marlin. Yeah. That is going to wrap up this episode of general engine and transmission install. So hopefully next time we will be we're going to definitely get the fuel tank and all that stuff in. So fuel tank, brakes, drive lines up next. The interior is gutted. We're going to get back to that, but I almost want to get it together and running before I put the dash back in it, make sure that the air and the heat and everything is going to be good to go. And then that way, if I have to I'm going to obviously have to do paint. I won't have to mask off a bunch of shit. I can just leave it and call it a day. So yeah, so I appreciate it. Here's your update on Danny. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Peace.
That wraps up another episode of Snale Racing.
Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe.